Well, hello, Bruins, and welcome to the Second Act Summer event. I hope you're all having a great summer so far. My name is Justin Seiler, and I'm the Director of Affinity Programs at the UCLA Alumni Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the program tonight. For those of you who have attended Second Act events before, welcome back. And for those of you who are first-time attendees, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of what this program is all about. This program, the Second Act, started actually in the fall of 2016, and it's designed to offer Bruins who are in their fifth decade of life and beyond opportunities and resources to engage and learn, optimize health, volunteer, and invest in themselves. We will be hosting one event per quarter moving forward. And we would actually love to hear your ideas. We have a couple mapped out for the next few, but we'd love to hear if you have any ideas for future programs. And some of you may have already provided feedback when you registered for tonight's event. But in the thank you email that will go out later this week, we will also provide a brief survey to collect any ideas you may have for future programs, topics of interest, or speaker recommendations that you may have. And now I will pass it off to our moderator for this evening, Associate Vice Chancellor of the UCLA Alumni Association, Julie Sina.
Thank you so much, Justin, and good evening, Bruins. I'm so excited to be sharing this space with you tonight, but as we have said, every time we've gathered over the last year, 2 years, we so do look forward to gathering again in JWAC and in the West Center and welcome you back home to your alumni home and having a chance to chat before the program, sometimes during the program, and then again after the program. I really miss the presence of being together. But for now, this space is very much appreciated, and we're so glad to have this time together. Tonight, we have two really fabulous panelists I'm really eager to introduce you to. And also, you all have sent us in some incredible questions, and I hope we have time to get through all of them this evening. Our second act tonight topic is around cannabis. And we have two panelists, as I said, and I'm so pleased to introduce you to a double Bruin, teacher, former teacher, an author, and an artist, Carrie Mapes. And our second panelist is Dr. Ziva Cooper. Dr. Cooper runs the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative in the Jane and Terry Semmel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. And she is also an associate professor in the UCLA Department of Psychiatry and Anesthesiology. Her research involves understanding the variables that influence both the therapeutic potential and adverse effects of cannabis and cannabinoids. And if I mispronounce that, she will correct me, I hope. And also, her research is funded by both the NIH and the state of California. So we have a lot to talk about in this next hour. But as Justin shared, the program, the second act, really looks at ways that we do have those second act possibilities. And we've talked about over the last couple of years since we've come together around this topic. We had, I think our first one was, So You Think You Have a Book in You. We brought together alums that wrote their first book, 50, 60, and beyond. We've recrafted resumes. We've talked about TED Talks. We've talked about all kinds of well-being issues. And the journeys of how our alumni get there are so fascinating. So, Carrie, that's where I'd love to start. You know, as I mentioned, you double Bruin, you've taught, you've authored teaching materials, and you are a fabulous artist. I've had the opportunity to see some of your artwork. Hopefully you're still painting. I'll get to that later. But talk to us about your second act, if you would. Take us on your journey in terms of what led to you as a co-founder of Hello Again.
I think what led me on this journey were two things, friendship and curiosity. And certainly one of the times in my life where those two things were in abundance was at UCLA for sure. But this happened for me later in life. You're right, I'm a double Bruin. I was there as an undergrad. I met my husband at UCLA. And then I stayed for graduate school, and I had a career teaching And then I took 20 years off to raise my kids.
And I believe you raised one as a Bruin as well.
I did raise one as a Bruin. I have a Bruin and a Blue Devil. Yes. That's been really fun. What a joy that has been. Both campuses and both kids. But yeah, that's been really fun. So we, my friend and I, Patty Pappas, and I were curious about cannabis and dispensaries. And when my Blue Devil went off to school, she's my youngest, and we were both empty nesters for the first time, we really just went out of curiosity. Cannabis had just become recreationally legal in California, and we'd heard a little bit. Really, I had no relationship with cannabis at all. I was not a user. I grew up in the war on drugs, and was probably a little chicken in high school and not that interested, and I just never really experimented with cannabis. So when we went to the dispensary, I felt the way I need to remember that some of our customers feel when they go into dispensaries for the first time. I was nervous. I felt out of place. I didn't know what things in there were. But one thing I will attribute to being this age is I was a lot less worried about asking a stupid question, and I was a lot less worried about taking up the bud tender's time. And Patty and I sat there and got a terrific education on how cannabis works in the body.
So Carrie, if I could just stop a second. So what led you and Patty to walk through that door?
Patty, we were curious. We were curious. I think we were chatting one day and we were just curious about it. And I don't know, we'd heard something on the radio or I don't know what it was, saw something. And so, we just went. And that's one thing that I really would say to people who are my age is, your curiosity is a real gift. And I had absolute negative thoughts about cannabis. And here I am in the cannabis space promoting the use of cannabis for wellness. So keeping an open mind and staying and continuing your education, whether formally or through your curiosity, I think is really important. So we went into a dispensary and we got this education, and everything that the bud tender said cannabis could do, we recognized in ourselves as women in menopause. And we just drew a direct line between the use of cannabis for wellness and the use of cannabis to balance the systems in our bodies that were haywire because of the hormone changes. Our temperature systems were haywire. Our sleep systems were haywire. Personally, my cognition was haywire. I had brain fog. I couldn't come up with the right word. My kids were frustrated with my memory. And I was worried about myself.
And I would imagine you were frustrated with your memory as well.
I was very frustrated. I actually drove myself to a memory clinic and had myself tested. There was dementia and Alzheimer's in my family, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this it? And there they said, no, that definitely is related to your hormones. So we drew this direct line between cannabis and wellness, and then we looked around the dispensary, and there was not only nothing there for us as we envisioned it, but there also was just nothing there marketed to us. It was, a few years ago, and things weren't beautifully packaged, and they didn't have clever branding, and nothing there was really for us, even though I was becoming interested in using cannabis to feel like myself again. So that set us on this path where we just kept looking for the answer to the next question. And it started with Google, and it continued with kind of talking to people that we knew that might know something about it, and they'd introduce us to somebody. And another positive I think about being this age is that your network is bigger, and you're less, you feel more entitled to talk to people that about what you're doing. And that's exactly what we did. And it took a while for us to realize that this product needed to be a vaginal suppository. And that is what our product is. It's a cannabis-based vaginal suppository that was formulated for women in menopause, but turns out it's helping with a whole lot of other symptoms.
So it sounds like that first conversation in the dispensary was a good one for you that launched the journey. But you got there because of your own personal journeys at the time.
Yes, definitely. And I think we realized a couple of things that day that have stuck with our brand, which is we'd never talked to each other about how we were feeling. And, so one of the things that we definitely wanted to do was open the conversation up a little bit about menopause and normalize it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the change of heart I had in that dispensary was destigmatizing for me about cannabis. And that's another thing that we really are trying to do with Hello Again as well is destigmatize the use of cannabis, especially for wellness. So that's what happened. And now it's 2.5 years later. Oh, it's 3 years later. It's 3 years later. It was in July. And we launched about 1.5 years ago and 2 weeks before COVID. But we were on 2 shelves and we spent the entirety of COVID getting ourselves onto 20 shelves and really just plugging into slow organic growth and building a community around our brand. Because I think there's nothing more powerful than when women recommend products to other women. So
Ziva, I'm going to get to you in a minute here, but Carrie, before I do, just quickly, hello again. Tell us on you and Patty arrived. How did you arrive at that name?
Well, I'm going to give credit to my Bruin husband, John Mapes, because we were noodling around with names, and really what we wanted was a product that didn't get you high, that you could use every day before you went to work, before you drove your kids to school, while you were parenting at night. And that's how we came up with that's how we realized this product needed to be a vaginal suppository, because we could use the THC at certain doses that wouldn't get you high because of the delivery system. So it bypasses the liver. So there are a lot of reasons. You have a lot of cannabinoid receptors in the female reproductive tract. But there are a lot of reasons why it needed to be a suppository. But we knew that we wanted to create a product to help women feel like themselves again, because that's what we wanted. We just wanted to feel like ourselves again. So Hello Again is a little nod to that and welcoming yourself back.
Yeah. Well, and even saying that, there's that sense of relief that comes with that. It feels, yeah. Well, it was interesting because when we came up with what did we want to do this summer, for a second act program, we actually were starting to hear more from alumni who were starting businesses focused in the cannabis industry as a second act kind of a move. And Carrie, I remember a couple of years ago when you started this and just how excited you were about starting the journey. So you thought about you immediately as we were putting this program together. So it's just been fun to watch the evolution of it. But I also would imagine, as we talked about at the beginning, double Bruin, you're a teacher, that some of those skills sound like that you brought those back again in this 20-year launching another career journey.
Definitely. Well, thank you for thinking of me. I really do appreciate that. And yes, certainly teaching skills. I mean, a big part of our brand, we have to educate women that they actually are in menopause. They're feeling the way that they are because of perimenopause, which can happen 10 years before you think it's going to. And often the perimenopause, you think you're too young for it, and your symptoms are at their worst. When the menopause, which is the ending of your cycle, when that actually happens, things actually feel a little bit better. So educating women on menopause, brain fog can be a part of it, all that stuff. B, educating women on the use of suppositories. It's not quite as the usage in the United States of suppositories is a little bit, there isn't a lot of usage in the United States. So that's part of it. And then lastly, of course, cannabis. So we have a lot of education to do around our brand. And yes, I'm sure that my career as a teacher has helped with that somewhat. Certainly my career as a mom has helped. I would really encourage everyone who has raised a family and thinks that they've been out of the workforce for too long to reconsider, because the people skills, the management skills, that I just can't tell you how many times Patty and I will come across a personality and we'll say, oh, I've seen that personality
Yeah.
before. I know how to deal with that. And the, you know, kind of the hard skills around starting a business we could learn, but the soft skills we had in spades because we raised, you know, between us 4 kids in a dynamic community who were very busy, and we juggled and, you know, had all of those volunteer roles and did it all. We did it all.
Mhm.
So that's the career of motherhood has really helped us for sure.
And I think that the other thing that you said in talking about your journey and the creation of Hello Again is also the normalization of these topics, whether it's menopause, suppositories, cannabis, and bringing that all together in a way that you're probably having conversations that 30, 40 years ago, you never would have imagined. If people told you then you'd be talking about all of this, you'd be like, who's that?
No, for sure. 100% for sure. And certainly our kids, I mean, we think
Yeah.
we're going to make a product. It's going to be a cannabis product. There's all this excitement. And then, you know, I think it needs to be a vaginal suppository, like, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. So
they've been terrific. They've been terrific.
They probably learned a lot along with you as well.
Yes, for sure.
So Dr. Ziva Cooper, director of the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative. When you were 5 years old and someone asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, was this what you told them?
At 5 years old, I think that I wanted to be a veterinarian back then, which is, you know, somewhat in line. I moved on to do some animal work later on in life, but no, I never thought, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you know, I didn't think that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. So it is a really exciting area.
So tell us about your work. And well, let me back up a minute. How did you land here? You earned your PhD at Michigan, moved to the West Coast, but tell us a little bit about your journey in the same way that Carrie told us about hers. How did you land doing the work that you're doing and directing the center? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was at University of Michigan, in undergrad and later on in graduate school, I was really taken by this idea that, you know, there are chemicals in plants that can alter perception and be both therapeutic as well as have some negative adverse effects. So at the time, I went on to do a doctorate in something called biopsychology, and I focused on just understanding how drugs, and most of the drugs that I was studying at the time actually came from plants, but they weren't the cannabis plant. It was the cocoa plant. So I was looking at cocaine and opioids that come from the poppy plant. And I was really intrigued by both the therapeutic effects as well as, you know, the adverse effects that we know very well. And I used animal models to learn more about what happens when organisms are exposed to these chemicals that have a yin and yang, right? They could be helpful for pain, but also be terribly addictive, and also understand what happens in the body and the brain and behavior. And the area was exciting to me because I got to learn about, you know, how these chemicals interacted with our biology. But I noticed that it was a really far leap from the animal to the human. So I went on and I moved to New York, where I got training in understanding how I can look at these substances in people and ask people how they felt when they were using these drugs, and get to understand, like in the case of opioids, again, we know there are severe adverse effects, but we also know that they're helpful. And around that time, I had a mentor who was really quite influential and still very influential to me. And she was studying the addictive qualities of cannabis, for which even though I had been entrenched in this field of learning about the negative effects of psychoactive substances and things like that, I never grew up thinking that, cannabis, there was, the war on drugs, but I never really thought that it was like, quote, addictive. And I started doing work with her, and around that time, a lot of states started legalizing cannabis for medical purposes. And I became really interested in understanding, what type of evidence do we have that this cannabis plant is therapeutic and helpful for the conditions that, for instance, Carrie was talking about. And how can, if they are therapeutic and helpful medicinally, how can we increase the therapeutic effect and decrease some of the negative effects that Carrie was talking about, like intoxication? It can actually, THC, the primary psychoactive component of the cannabis plant, could actually not be so great for the brain fog or for memory. And so how can you, tweak the system to increase its therapeutic effects? So about 13 years ago, I became deeply involved in doing studies where I was able to actually give people this drug that is federally illegal and look at people's response in the laboratory. So imagine you're at Columbia University, you're bringing people in, and you're having them smoke a cannabis joint, and you're looking at their heart rate and their blood pressure. You're asking them how they feel. You're asking about their anxiety response, looking at their pain response. And it was a really unique situation. And it still is unique. There are not very many institutions where you can do this. So fast forward about 10 years, I heard about UCLA's Cannabis Research Initiative. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to come to Los Angeles.
So you were still at Columbia at the time?
I was still at Columbia. And in Los Angeles, the Proposition 64 just rolled out, and Proposition 64 allowed not just for medical use of cannabis, but also for non-medical use as well. And the industry started to really flourish here. And so I had some contacts here at UCLA, and I started talking, and it seemed clear like this was an ideal place for me to actually do this research, because so many people are using these products for medical purposes, and yet, believe it or not, the science is still lagging. And there's so much opportunity here at UCLA because a lot of people are really interested in understanding the effects. So it's been a really wonderful experience where I can focus on my own research and look at, I'm still doing my lab work where I'm giving people the chemicals in the cannabis plant and looking at the therapeutic medicinal effects and seeing how I can boost those therapeutic effects. And then also working with scholars in the legal field and political science and public policy. So it's really been wonderful.
So tell us a little bit about the specific focus of your research at UCLA and the teaching that you're doing.
Thank you for asking. And actually, my particular research focus does cross with Carrie's. So it's really fun that we're here together. One aspect of my research focuses on how these chemicals in this cannabis plant can be really helpful for pain and how they might be helpful in reducing the opioid epidemic. So we know that people are really reliant on opioids for pain relief. It's been thought that the cannabis plant and those chemicals in the cannabis plant might be helpful as substitutes for opioids. They might be safer alternatives. And so we're working on doing some of those studies where, when you go into a dispensary, like Carrie said, there are all these different formulations and different chemicals in these products. And we're actually looking at these individual chemicals to see how helpful they are for pain and if they can really reduce the impact of opioids. But another strong interest of mine is specifically related to women's health. So just like all other areas of medicine, unfortunately, not very many studies have included women, but we know that women are very different from men. We have different biology. We respond differently to environmental stimuli. We have a different aging trajectory, and we respond differently to medicines. And so a lot of my work actually revolves around how cannabis might be helpful for women compared to men, and what are some of the reasons why biologically. Is it due to the hormones? Is it due to age? Is it due to other biological factors that we think might contribute to it? So there's definitely a nice synergy here between myself and Carrie.
Is there, if I could ask just a follow-up, is there a specific age range of women's and women's health issues that you focus on?
So, what's interesting is that for the most part, because my work really focuses on giving these drugs to people, sometimes for these drugs, it's for the first time they're given to people. It's called a phase 1 study. So for the most part, a lot of my studies involve they have to involve healthy people. And so usually that restricts the age range of people that we can actually recruit. But it's become really apparent that, you can find healthy people that are beyond 50 and 55.
That's what I was going to ask you about. It's
Right,
interesting because
right.
I think
And
that it's,
so,
what's healthy within different ranges too would be.
exactly. Or like even, the idea of young adults. Young adults respond differently than people who are in their 40s. And so that's a really important variable. And so right now we're actually working on establishing a line of study that's looking at how women who are older, who are perimenopausal, postmenopausal, how they respond to cannabis. And believe it or not, it hasn't actually been studied in the laboratory, but it needs to be studied because of Carrie's products that are available and other products that we're starting to see. And women are increasingly turning to cannabis and cannabis products for a variety of different indications like pain and to help treat menopause and anxiety and even osteoporosis. There's evidence out there in the animal literature showing that it might be helpful for bone strength. But there aren't very many people actually studying this in humans. And so this is a gap that we're really trying to fill at UCLA.
Oh, thank you. We're really grateful that you're here. And I already can tell, Carrie and Ziva, we could probably spend hours. So I'm going to try to jump into some questions. And thank you to our audience. We've got a series of really great questions. I'll warn you, they're all over the map. So we're just going to be jumping all over the place. As well as I know Christine has shared in the chat, my colleague Christine, ways to get your questions in. So, and she's texting me. So I want you to know I'm not, if my eyes go down, I'm reading my text from Christine. So just trying to multitask here. But I do have one follow-up before we jump to the questions. Ziva, when you were talking about the testing that you're going through, Carrie, can you tell us a little bit more about that process for you? How you got from the idea through the testing phase and what that was like, the experience was like for you and Patty?
Yeah, so once we conceptualized the product, our first challenge was to find the right professional formulator. And we'd already spoken with a couple medical consultants about dosing and about, in general, our product. And then once we found our formulator, we were kind of off and running, but we formulated.
So just for those of us that aren't in the know, a formulator is?
So somebody who actually can professionally formulate the product. So our suppository it has a base of cocoa butter and avocado oil and vitamin E and little apple cider vinegar and some helichrysum in it, which is the base of the product. And then for our daytime product or our nighttime product, obviously for the two different uses for that, we added THC and CBD in different ratios, more in the nighttime product, more THC in the nighttime product. And then we also added other botanicals. So I don't have the whole list in front of me right now, but it's no surprise that we have chamomile and lavender in our sleep product, and we have rosemary and green tea extract in our everyday. So depending on how we wanted each SKU to behave, those are the botanicals that we chose for the terpenes that they have in order to address what we wanted them to address. So the professional formulator, first of all, has a license to be a cannabis formulator. and deal with the THC and the CBD, but also has the scientific background to make a product like ours. We did the heavy lifting of our formulation was actually without the THC and the CBD. The hardest part was getting the emulsified product to look right, to not smell like cannabis, to, you know, melt at the right rate, not leak, not melt too fast. And so we did it. That was the bulk of the longest time period was during that phase. And then when we layered in the THC and the CBD in a couple different ratios, it was pretty clear which were the most effective. So.
Now, was that person also then involved in the testing process for you too?
Yeah. So I don't know how much everybody knows about cannabis, so I will try not to spend too much time on it. But every cannabis product in the state of California is tested very rigorously for all kinds of things, for minerals and metals and rat hair, and I mean the list is pretty dense. And so every time a new batch is manufactured, and again, you have to have a licensed manufacturer within the cannabis space, it goes sampling of that batch goes directly to a testing lab and is pretty much held hostage there until we get two readings. One is for potency, so that the consumer knows that the THC levels and the CBD levels in the product are exactly what it says on the package. And then also for purity. So, and then that's where that big long list that I referred to comes into play. So once any product passes those tests, they're then released to distributors who hold the products until dispensaries place orders. So the cannabis is always in the hands of a licensed entity all along the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Is that similar to the experience in your work, Ziva?
Yes. So with respect to the actual quality of the product, in addition to, you know, the state of California, the products that we work with, they have to be regulated from a federal perspective. So they're actually regulated by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, but most relevant, I think, across the board to what I do is that they're regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So the type of product that I have to use is manufactured quite rigorously according to even, you know, what you would see in the pharmaceutical industry. So when I tell the FDA that I want to do a study, I have to send them a list of all the chemicals in the product. I have to demonstrate the stability, the fact that once I have it in my laboratory, it's stable over 12 months or 18 months, and that it's consistent from batch to batch. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of heavy lifting for me as an investigator. And it's also a lot of work for the companies that provide me with the study medication that I'm using.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both. I'm going to jump into now the questions that we received in advance, as well as the questions that Christine is texting me right now. Thank you, Christine. And again, I'll share with the two of you as well as with our audience. We're going to be jumping all over the place here. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first question is, do either of you have an opinion on if or when cannabis may be delisted as a Schedule I drug? There's legislation led by Carrie Booker to delist and allow banks to provide banking services to cannabis businesses. So do either of you have any thoughts or an opinion about that?
Well, I think that will happen. When is the big question? That's my opinion. I don't think, though, that means the light switch is turned on and all of a sudden I can ship hello again across the country or sell it on Amazon. I think that each state has developed their cannabis industry in very different ways, and there are businesses that are dependent upon the different setups in each state. So I'm not sure how much will get easier right away, even with the federal declassification for a brand like Hello Again, although the banking issue would be a huge one. That would be the most immediate relief for brands like mine.
And a follow-up question on that is, well, a couple here is, and this one also is for either one of you. Will cannabis help back pain in women?
So I can say that some women might report that it helps with their back pain. And I think something that's important to remember when we're talking about cannabis that Carrie's mentioned is that cannabis is not one thing. It's, this is something you'll hear me say quite a bit. It's a million different things. Cannabis is a plant that has hundreds of chemicals, and they all come in different concentrations depending on where the plant has grown, how much sunlight it has received, how much water it's received. And also what impacts cannabis and its effects is how it's taken, right? So Carrie's talked about the vaginal suppository, where the chemicals in that vaginal suppository would have a very different effect if you're going to inhale those same chemicals or take them orally. So does cannabis help back pain? It depends on, what kind of chemicals are in that cannabis and how is the cannabis being used. And also probably depends a lot on the person. But at this point in time, there hasn't been much with respect to looking at cannabis compared to a placebo, a fake, like a sugar pill, to specifically examine back pain in women. But this is something in general, that has to be looked at, specifically pain symptoms and pain indications in women, because they're quite different than what we see in men.
Yeah,
Carrie, I don't know if you have.
No, I mean, I would say cannabis is worth a try for back pain. And, Advil doesn't work for everybody either. So, and, I'm so happy hearing what you're doing at UCLA, Ziva, because we do need more studies. We definitely need more information. Anecdotally, we have women that use our suppositories for endometriosis pain and for menstrual cramps. And somebody wrote to us saying that it helped her bursitis in her hips and she could roll over at night. So, I would advocate for trying something like that with that local, for back pain, with that local application of the cannabis in the female reproductive tract, I think could be a good start.
And a question kind of aligned with, I think, where you're both going with this is specific around the suppositories, Carrie, is could these suppositories be used for generalized pain as medicinal cannabis? And just lost my question there. For people not experiencing menopause. And again, I know I also want to give a caveat for both of you. I know these questions, we're throwing a lot of questions at you. It's okay to pass or say you don't know, even though I know that we want to make you the expert of all.
Well, I feel comfortable as an expert on Hello Again. And obviously I'm not a doctor like Ziva, so maybe she should answer first.
I want to make very clear to the audience members that I'm a PhD, I'm a scientist, I'm not an MD. And so I don't, when I answer these questions, they're coming from a place of the scientific research and not a clinical recommendation. So I'll start with that. And I think that, Carrie, I'm stuck in the lab, I'm writing grants, I'm doing my studies, I'm basing my studies based off of large population evidence that women are reporting that they feel relief from pain when they're using THC or CBD. Carrie has the advantage of actually speaking to these women who are using these products, right? And so she has, kind of a hands-on experience with respect to people's real experiences using that specific product and how it might be helpful. Like, it's really interesting, the endometriosis story. I can tell you as a researcher, there's some really interesting nuggets there if you look at a rodent where, you can have a model of endometriosis and you see that THC is helpful with some of these types of disease progression states in endometriosis. And unfortunately, that hasn't been tested in humans yet, but yet, Carrie, you have the experience where you've talked to these women who are telling you that they have relief when they're using your suppositories for that specific indication.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think for generalized pain, as far as suppositories go, this might be a good kind of place to kind of talk about how suppositories work.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these cannabinoid receptors in your body. The most dense place is in your brain, but it's quite dense in receptors in the female reproductive tract. So when the THC and the CBD, the cannabinoids that are in the suppository, locally meet those receptors, there's an effect. And the biological goal of the receptors meeting the cannabinoids is to balance your systems, for your body to come into homeostasis. So there's that, but there also are blood vessels and capillaries in your reproductive tract. So there also is a little bit of uptake into the bloodstream. It's not, you don't test positive, or it's not enough uptake of the THC to feel high, to get that psychoactive high. The THC is there, but it hasn't gone through your digestive tract. It hasn't gone through your liver, and it hasn't become the same psychoactive substance that it does when you smoke or vape or ingest. So as far as generalized pain, I think THC and CBD, well, CBD in particular, is a great anti-inflammatory. So I notice when I use it that my thumb that usually aches doesn't ache, and other things that are probably caused by inflammation are relieved, and I'm less achy, that kind of thing. So again, that's worth a try. But I think also, if you're looking for more generalized pain, there are other ways to ingest cannabis that might go more specifically toward the cause of the pain.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question, I think, for both of you, is product, the shelf life. What is there a shelf life around the product, Carrie, that you've developed, and perhaps, maybe in general for the work that you're doing, Ziva?
Well, there's a shelf life at dispensaries of 18 months, regardless of how long the shelf life of your product is. So that's always a little bit of a game. Our particular product is pretty stable and it has a longer shelf life than 18 months. So there's always a little bit of a game there about inventory, but that's just part of being in the cannabis business.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I will say that shelf life, especially with these chemicals in the cannabis plant, they are, when you're talking about just the plant itself, that it's very susceptible to degradation over time. And so, like in our lab, we are very careful with how we keep our actual cannabis plant, because we know that if it's not kept at, freezer temperatures, then some of that THC can get turned into inactive chemicals. So we would get a very different behavioral response. And so that's a very important feature of what we do, is we have to make sure, just like in a pharmaceutical trial, that we keep all of our study medications, and that includes the cannabis plant, at a very specific temperature that's monitored very carefully every single day.
Thank you both for that. Here's another question. We do have our second act audience, so this is a second act question, if you will. Is there any research on interaction between cannabis and medications that many older people take, beta blockers, thyroid needs, etc.? So probably a question for any age, but in our second act audience, any research that you're aware of about that interaction in medications that I will speak for our generation may be taking?
So
Well,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carrie.
No, I was going to defer to, I think you need to check with your doctor. And again, this is about what the delivery system of the cannabis is. But please, Ziva.
Yeah, so this has become an issue over the last couple of years. I think because the formulations are changing, because a lot of people are using these products orally, and because they're not just THC, we're also looking at cannabidiol, CBD, that is known to interact with some medications, for example, blood thinners. So for a blood thinner where there's a very narrow, what we call therapeutic margin of safety, it's really important that the patient, that your audience members talk to your physician, and your physician should be able to look into the potential drug-drug interactions with the cannabis product that that patient is using. And this, Carrie and I can go into the importance of physician education in this space as well, because as more products are on the market, more patients will be using them and more patients will be having questions related to their safety with other prescribed therapeutics.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think again, we learn so much as we continue to grow on this journey as well. Carrie, were you going to say something?
Well, one great resource is the Cannabis Nurses Network, and there's a really great network of cannabis nurses in the state of California. And if they can't answer a specific question, they can get you to a doctor who can, which is a tricky thing to find a doctor with that level of knowledge about cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Which here's another question I think that along those lines is also, are these products covered by insurance?
Mine is not. No, I'm sure it's not. But
so these products are not, but it's interesting. I think that this is an important point to bring up that we haven't touched on, that, there are FDA approved medications that are covered by insurance that are chemicals that are built off of what the plant expresses. So in the 1980s, the FDA actually approved THC, this intoxicating component of the cannabis plant, for certain indications. And so you can get that legally from your physician, and that is covered by insurance. And in 2018, the FDA actually approved the first therapeutic derived from the cannabis plant. And so for certain indications, that is also covered by insurance, but the products that are in dispensaries are not covered by insurance.
Well, and I think, Carrie, early on, and you both have kind of touched on this, talked about this tension between this evolving development of cannabis for medicinal purposes and, the product that you work so hard on, Carrie. And one person is asking about, how do we still deal with that tension around the sort of the illicit issue around the war on drugs piece, as well as the medicinal and the justice issues that come across by the work that both of you are doing? How do we still reconcile that? What are your thoughts on that?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure. I
think it goes back to, it's a long question, so let me go back to it. I think it's sort of that issue that you raised, Carrie, at the very beginning, is there's, sort of the labels that people have on cannabis and marijuana as an illicit drug. How do we reconcile that still? Do you feel like that still is out there and a factor in the work?
I do. I mean, I do think that is still out there. I think it depends what state you're in, and I think it depends on your age for sure. And I think that weddings in the future will have the older people around the bar drinking martinis and the younger people having edibles and vapes and smokes. I really do. I think
a few of those may be going on now.
Yeah. I think that, even someone 10 years younger than I am has a different outlook. But I think that products like ours help a lot. There are a lot of information websites. Element is a great one that gives a lot of information about cannabis and wellness for women specifically. There are a lot of people out there that are just working to destigmatize. I mean, even Seth Rogen just came out with his whole line of beautiful, grinders and lighters and accessories that are just gorgeous, and they don't look like the potty old things that, with the tie-dye all over them. They don't look like things from the past use of cannabis that is in tandem with that kind of stoner,
right,
imagery. So I think the more people talk about how they use cannabis, definitely is going to help. Certainly, you know, the way each state evolves, I think, is going to have a lot to do with it too. Dispensaries are really, really looking more and more like boutiques and little jewelry stores and little, you know, beauty areas and wellness areas and beautiful accessories. That's going to help. I mean, I just think that in time, the stigma around cannabis for the everyday person is really going to evaporate, but we're definitely not there yet. And I mean, please, Patty and I get jokes all the time about, you know, our pot product, which is in that statement is baked in that stigma about cannabis.
Right, just the way that's phrased.
Yeah.
How about in your work as in running the center and as a faculty member? Do you feel any of that stigmatization?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting place to be in because I do study both sides of it. So I study, you know, the negative effects. There are all these products that we haven't talked about that are essentially produced to give people an efficient, intoxicating experience. So you can go into a dispensary and get a product that's very far from the plant itself. I mean, you know, it's an extract that's almost 100% THC. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where, you know, you have these products that are specifically made for wellness and for health and for medical purposes. And so I'm kind of straddling both worlds where I'm looking at both effects. So, you know, and I have grants supporting looking at both the negative effects and the therapeutic effects. And I do sometimes get criticism from both sides, I think. I mean, this is the issue, right? Where when you're doing too much, you can get criticized from both sides. And, you know, there is, you know, whenever I give a talk, somebody always asks, you know, oh, is there going to be samples and, you know, that kind of thing. So there still is a, that kind of attitude around it. But you know, what you've heard today is a very professional conversation about a plant that can be used for medical purposes and how important it is to really understand the effects of it. And it's become a real issue, especially in Los Angeles and California, where this is a product that a lot of patients are thinking critically about using because the traditional medications are not meeting their needs or they're having adverse effects. So I think the conversation is slowly evolving, but it is frustrating when I hear that lingo kind of disparaging the plant and talking about it in unprofessional terms or the tie-dye stuff and that kind of thing. So it's a very interesting space to be in.
Well, and Ziva, I really appreciate what you just said about that. And again, you look at, you know, again, where we started, Carrie, and what started you and Patty on this journey, dealing with menopause. And, you know, as Ziva said, you know, you're having the opportunity from your experience, from Patty's experience, and the women that you've talked with about the incredible impact that you've had. So that's the narrative that I'm glad that we're having an opportunity to talk about tonight, in addition to the research that you're doing, Ziva, that is hopefully moving us forward, you know, in this conversation. A quick question for both of you as we bring this to a close. For you, I know we don't have too much time, Carrie, but two questions for you that just came in. One is, any quick advice you can give to somebody who's starting a business? And then somebody wants to know, where can they get your product?
That's lovely. Thank you for that question. I'll answer that one first because it's a quick one. If you go to helloagainproducts.com, you will be able to find a store near you. And then business, you know, anyone in their second act, first of all, this has been fantastic because I have a partner who has strengths that I don't have. And we're aligned on the things that are important, but we support each other's strengths and weaknesses. So and it makes it a joy to go to work with somebody like that. So that's one. And then second, you know, in the context of second act, I would say that my family's been great, my friends have been great, but when you recraft a life for yourself and redefine yourself, it redefines the role that you play in other people's lives. So you have to be a little bit ready for the fact that some people may not like that, or you may not work for them any longer, or miss the role that you used to play in their lives. But I really truly believe that if you have an inkling that you have a second act in you, you have a curiosity, you just know you want to get started with something, just get started with it and put one foot forward and answer one question and just keep going. Because I really do believe that when you kind of are aligned with your kind of power purpose in life, then people come into your life that need to come into your life, and doors are opened, and it's hard work and you've got to put yourself out there. But this whole notion of kind of being overwhelmed by the thought of going back to work or starting something for the first time, put that aside and just do a little bit and get started and see what happens. Because it's really, it feels so wonderful to have opportunity to grow, especially at this age.
I love the way you frame that power purpose. What's your power purpose, Carrie?
Gosh, I really feel like Patty and I both believe that we really are here to help women feel better. And we really believe that when women are feeling good and can be their best selves, that has a trickle effect in their families. It has a trickle effect in their communities. And women are amazing. They need a good night's sleep, and they need to, they need to be their health needs to be supported. But there really isn't anything a woman can't do. I really believe that. And we just need to kind of strengthen we call it the V force in the world.
Thank you, Carrie. Dr. Cooper, 10 years from now, I invite you to another second act. Hopefully I'll still be here to do that. How's this conversation going to change 10 years from now? If you had a crystal ball, what would we be focused on 10 years from now if you had that look in the crystal ball and the impact that you're having?
I think the first big thing that will change is that we won't have the same questions about the regulatory status of cannabis that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, knock on whatever.
Right, and the idea of stigma and things like that. That's my first look into the crystal ball. I mean, a tremendous amount has changed over the last 10 years, and we still have a long way to go. And I think that this is. I think that there is a silver lining and a light beyond the horizon, where you might have sensed that when I've been talking, I've been saying a lot, we have a lot to learn. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. And I know that in 10 years, based off of what we're doing at UCLA and what's happening internationally and nationally, we're going to know a lot more in 10 years. But I will say that the industry will continue to grow in ways that we as scientists cannot predict. And getting the cues from how the industry is rolling out and how people are responding to it is really important in helping to guide our research. So the products that Carrie and Patty are producing and the vision that they've had, that is great indication for where the science should head. This is a serious area that has been going neglected this whole time, is looking at the health effects of cannabis in women. And so I think that what we're going to see over time is that there's going to be increasing dialogue between scientists, researchers, industry, and consumers to figure out the important areas to address.
Well, I have really appreciated the intersection of both of your narratives, the research, the science, the work that you're doing, Ziva, and Carrie, what started as a real personal health journey for you, launched a business with an impact that's really making such a difference in the narrative of so many people in our audience. So thank you for that. And it's really just been a great and very speedy hour to talk with both of you. And to all of our listeners out there, I know there's many questions that we didn't get to, so we may have to have a repeat down the road. But so grateful to both of you, and hope that we are able to come back together even 3 years from now and talk about what's been next for both of you and the impact that you're both having in the world. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you're doing, for sharing your stories. Thank you to our audience for being in this space with us tonight. And as we asked at the beginning, Justin put out there, please don't hesitate to let us know a narrative that you'd like to share or something that you'd like to hear more about as we all have our second, third, fourth acts and hopefully an encore after that. So thank you, Carrie Mapes. Thank you, Ziva Cooper. And as we always say, forever we are brewing strong. Thank you so much.